From KVUE News in Austin, you're watching Texas This Week with Ashley Goodo.
Good Sunday morning. A controversial immigration bill is headed to Governor Greg Abbott's desk. We'll have more on that in just a minute, but first, here are 3 things you need to know in Texas politics. Rural Republicans in the Texas House of Representatives stood with Democrats Friday, rejecting education savings accounts or school vouchers. House Bill 1 would have allowed parents to use $10,500 per student in taxpayer money to pay private school tuition. State Representative John Rainey, a Republican from College Station, offered an amendment to remove ESAs from the proposal and keep the record public school funding. 21 Republicans voted with Democrats to support the amendment and reject ESAs for a total vote of 84 to 63. The author of the bill, State Representative Brad Buckley, pulled the bill from debate, sending it back down to committee. 7 more women are joining the lawsuit challenging the Texas abortion law, bringing the total number of plaintiffs to 22. The law bans all abortions in Texas unless a woman's life is in danger or she is at risk of serious impairment of a bodily function. The women suing say they were denied abortions despite medical complications and are asking the court to clarify the law. The suit also claims the state's near-total ban violates their rights under the Texas Constitution. A Burnett County judge ruled the whistleblower lawsuit against Attorney General Ken Paxton can proceed. The lawsuit and $3 million settlement that was reached with the plaintiffs is what led to General Paxton's impeachment. Paxton was acquitted, but the whistleblowers still haven't been paid. Another hearing in the case is set for December 14th. You know, I want to start by having you tell our viewers where along the border you live and describe for us some of the conditions there as it relates to people who are unlawfully crossing the border.
All right. So I live in El Paso, Texas. It's right on the border of the Texas-Mexico border. Juarez is just a walking distance away from downtown. As far as the situation right now, it's pretty calm. We go through cycles of hundreds of or sometimes thousands of migrants crossing the border illegally, turning themselves into border patrol. Sometimes we see them in the streets in downtown, asking for money, finding ways to get out of El Paso to get to their final destination.
You know, Governor Greg Abbott asked lawmakers to pass 2 legislative policies during this special session aimed at deterring illegal immigration. The first, Senate Bill 3, which is now back in the Senate for final approval. It would allocate $1.5 billion for a border wall. And, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle were reluctant about this because they say a wall doesn't really work.
Right. Part of the reluctancy is that over the past 2 years, the state has already allocated about $1 billion into border barriers, that being a wall or some other type of barrier. And so far, the state has only been able to build 10 miles of that barrier along the Texas-Mexico border. The reluctancy now is this money being used effectively? Depending on what party you're talking to, they're saying that we can use the money to more effectively deter illegal immigration. Other people believe that the money could be used to be invested in other social services like building hospitals or funding public education.
Yeah, and we should note that $1.5 billion expected to just pay for 50 miles of wall. The other bill, which is on its way to the governor's desk at this point, is Senate Bill 4. And people across the state and really across the country are denouncing this legislation. I want you to first give us an overview about what Senate Bill 4 will do.
Right. So what Senate Bill 4 does is it creates a state crime that would make it illegal for someone to cross the Rio Grande from Mexico into Texas. It is already illegal under federal law, but because it's only a federal law, it's the federal government who's in charge of enforcing those statutes. With Senate Bill 4, what it does is that it makes it a state misdemeanor, and it allows police officers to arrest someone who they suspect crossed the border illegally. And once they're arrested, they'll present the case to a judge, and the judge could issue an order to ask the person to leave Texas back to Mexico. And that would be enforced by local police, state police. Basically, any Texas resources will be used to be able to essentially deport some of these migrants.
And so let's talk about one of the things that you said that's very important in Senate Bill 4, that police will be able to detain people who they believe are here unlawfully. That is something, that part of it, the question of how police figure that out or who they are set to target, that's a big part of concern, right?
That is the biggest concern that opponents of this bill raise. The reason for that is because probable cause can be built in any way. Just simply asking someone, did you cross the border illegally? Or witnessing someone crossing the border illegally. Keep in mind that, along the border, there are people who use the Rio Grande for recreational reasons. It's not illegal to use the Rio Grande. It is illegal to cross the Rio Grande into the other country. And so for a lot of people, they worry that police who may not be used to border life can apprehend people who are simply living along the border. So that's the biggest concern. And not everyone who is here legally, immigrants who are here legally, carry their immigration papers around, or there are U.S. citizens along the border who their first language is Spanish and may not be as dominant in English. And so that's another concern.
The Mexican government responded to all of this, to Senate Bill 4, specifically the section of the bill that would allow Texas to deport, right, immigrants to Mexico. What are leaders in Mexico saying?
Right. This bill gets really complicated really fast, regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, whether you agree or disagree with this, is that immigration matters needs the cooperation from Mexico. In this very specific case, because Texas is seeking to deport migrants back to Mexico. Keep in mind that a lot of the migrants crossing right now are not Mexican, and then sometimes cross the border illegally into Mexico as well. So they don't necessarily have permission to be in Mexico either. So this gets complicated. And in the bill, there was no plan to how to deal with this. How do we touch base with Mexican officials and ask them, are you willing to take a non-Mexican national into your country? And it's already really complicated at the federal level. The federal government, when they deport people back to their home countries, they do it under a very specific process, and they have to have diplomatic relations with them. For a long time, the U.S. and Venezuela did not have diplomatic relations. So it was really hard for the U.S. government to deport Venezuelans back to Venezuela. Those relationships have started and those deportations have started, but it was after months of negotiations. And in this bill, there's no mention of how is Texas going to negotiate with Mexico. And keep in mind, countries have diplomatic relations with other federal governments, not states.
You know, it has been suggested that the bigger plan for Republicans with this bill is to legally challenge Arizona versus the United States. In that ruling, the Supreme Court said immigration is a federal responsibility and it's not the authority of states to enforce immigration law. It would really seem Texas is really trying to push this.
Right. The sponsor of the bill has said that that's not his intention. But there have been key Republicans who have said that is what they want. They want to trigger a legal fight with the Biden administration to take this case, to take a new immigration case to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court makeup has changed and it leans more conservative than in 2012 when it ruled on a different immigration case when Arizona passed its own immigration law. So, like I said, to be fair, the sponsor of the bill has said that's not the intention. But there have been Republicans who have gone on record and said that is what they want.
You can learn more about the bills that passed at KVUE.com. That's Texas This Week.